Okay, I think we could start. Can you hear me in the back as well?
Yeah.
Thank you. So good morning. So I'm Aalto. I'm Associate Professor of User Interfaces here in Aalto University. I started last year. And on behalf of myself and the other groups here in Helsinki, I focus on HCI. I want to welcome you to talk by Professor Barry Brown from Stockholm University. So he's a professor of human-computer interaction and research director at Mobile Life Center, the website over there. It's one of the best places in Europe to study mobile human-computer interaction. And he was previously associate professor at the University of California and a fellow at the University of Glasgow and a research scientist at Hewlett-Packard in Bristol. He has a very unique background in HCI. He has a degree in sociology as well as computer science. This combination has allowed him to address some emerging topics in HCI with a very firm and rigorous social scientific approach. He's been able to leverage that background and address important topics like mobile leisure use of information technology, topics like games and tourism, museum visitors, the use of maps, television watching, and sports spectating. And he even has a book coming up in MIT Press called Enjoying Machines. So today he's going to talk about Apple and iPhone. And if there's anything negative about him, it's the fact that he chose to come to Stockholm instead. Two more things. If you want to chat with Barry, he's going to stay here in the room for a while after the talk. There's another talk coming up on Friday at the University of Helsinki where he talks more about
HCI.
HCI, more about HCI research. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Antti. Antti knows many more negative things about me, so he's been very kind in that direction. Like Antti said, I work at the Mobile Life Center, which is a Stockholm University research center. We're always really happy to have students visit, and we're always very happy to have faculty come and give talks and the like. Anttie's very kind in his description there, but if you go to the website, you'll find that I think we're a really nice, diverse set of research, obviously focusing on mobile devices, but recently we've got very much entangled in all the hype around the Internet of Things and such things, and I think we've got a really quite nice balance between human scientists of different forms and technical researchers. So I'd like you to check that out, and if you're looking for any job opportunities, we're going to be hiring later on in the year. Okay, so this is a bit of a difficult talk for me because it's a little bit of engaging with maybe something that you might call the elephant in the room, which is a commercial company, Apple. And I want to try and think through a little bit about what we might learn from Apple for human-computer interaction. I'm going to actually go through a little bit of history. I'm going to talk a little bit about the iPhone, obviously, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my research, which I think for the last, last 4 or so years has been focused on trying to understand what this little device has done and the impact it's having on our lives. But I want to start somewhere else. I want to start on June 23rd, 2003. Can you think back to what you were doing in 2003? I was a very arrogant person in 2003. I finished my PhD and I worked at Hewlett-Packard for a few years. And I tried to get them, when I was working there, to do work to build mobile devices of different sorts. It was pretty much a failure. I mean, why would a company want to build mobile devices? There's obviously no market there. That was a bit of a failure. So then I moved on and I got a job at Glasgow University. At the time I worked in mobile system design, and if you go back to 2003, I don't know if you might remember the sort of form that mobile devices were. They were called PDAs, which was a dreadful name, and they were pretty hard to get them to do anything at all. I worked on trying to do different applications for these mobile devices, so games was one exciting area. But being in a computer science department as I was, people also did things like they watched Apple keynotes. And it was during one of those Apple keynotes on June the 23rd that something happened. Let me play a little clip.
It's opening some Photoshop documents here. These browser windows. All right. So I think that's probably about done. We've got a lot of stuff open here, and you know, a lot of Photoshop windows, Photoshop palettes. How do I find something? Well, here's how we do it. You ready? Oh, just like this. Let me show you this in slow-mo. And as you notice, as I mouse around here, it shows me exactly what the windows are. Boom, right? Boom, 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 boom.
People get very excited about Windows moving, something we can't take for granted today. This was a demonstration of a new feature of Apple's operating system. And you remember this one? Called Exposing. Now, when I saw this video, my heart sunk because it was a very elegant solution to, it seemed to be quite a central problem in human-computer interaction, which was window management. And it did it quite a simple way. It drew on many existing ideas and concepts. So, for example, one of the ways you could activate Exposé was you move your mouse into the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, or corner you would pick, which in good old Fitz law terms is obviously a very easy target to hit. And then that would activate showing all your windows. And if you had a Mac computer, I guess you'd probably use this at some time to navigate between your windows. It was inventive in its own right. It wasn't just a kind of formulaic thing. And it built on some of the advantages that Apple had. Apple's OS X had huge amounts of efforts put into its animation engine. It really was the only operating system at the time that had such an advanced animation engine for doing this sort of effects. So why did HCI do this? Why did the research field I work in not do this? It was a practical application that was improving how systems are used and addressed a really important problem, which was window management, something that we all do thousands and thousands of times every day. So at the time, I thought, it's the user interface researchers, the WISP people. They're all stupid, aren't they? Those idiots. Look, Apple comes along and gives them, feeds their whole field back to them. There you go. Apple's doing much better than these user interface people. What do they know? They're not doing it. Me as a mobile system developer, obviously this would never happen to me. We were really clever in that area. Obviously this was just the WISP people being really stupid. Oops. Then, a few years after that, Apple did the same thing to the research field I worked in. There's many things you can say about the iPhone. But there's not much that does get said about the iPhone in HCI. And I think that's misfortunate, because while many of the research areas that have been developed in HCI before the iPhone ended up getting tangled into its interface in different ways, it was innovative in solving a set of really important problems that mobile systems have been stuck on. Since the iPhone came out, I've been trying to sort of understand how it's used, understand the impact that it's having on our lives in different ways. But I've also trying to understand a little bit about where it came from. What were the things that made this innovation happen? I think the iPhone still has to be put down as maybe the biggest technological change that we've had in my area of anyway. You're all familiar with that chime noise, aren't you? don't want to somehow raise this too high. I'm going to talk a little bit about the dangers of dealing with a commercial product in a company like Apple, which is inadequately criticised in lots of ways. I still didn't really take it seriously. Okay, let's look at mobile phones. So I made this point and said that before the iPhone, mobile devices were quite crude. These are different handsets made by Docomo, the Japanese telephone manufacturer. Docomo a little bit unusual in that they essentially make pretty much most of their own handsets. Right about 2007, you start to see something happen to the phones. So before that point, they're all this kind of clamshell design that was very popular in Japan and in other parts of the world. But after about 2009, the screens get bigger, the clamshell disappears, until, if you look at their current range, what do they look like? This flat, infinity pool-like expansive glass in the front. Maybe some buttons, more or less buttons around it. Still some ones with more buttons hanging on, but generally it's moved to a form factor that's essentially the same as the iPhone. Even if you look at just the size of different companies, if you don't think the iPhone had an important impact, then one might say, I've got some shares in Nokia to sell you. Apple still to this day makes the vast amount of profits in the mobile industry. So not only has that device, I think, changed what the form of mobile devices, but also I think it also had a big impact on the money that was available for research and on the fortunes of venerable companies. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Nokia in a second. So my talk's really going to try to talk about Apple, try to think about a sensible way to talk about Apple that doesn't fall into some of the traps that you might have of talking around them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of the iPhone, some interesting things you can find a little bit about the design if you look at some of the patents that Apple filed. And I'm going to talk about a fairly unknown designer who I would argue was responsible essentially for the iPhone's success. He has the same name as me, Bas. And then link this up into some of my more recent research I've been doing, trying to understand a little bit about what the iPhone does. So there's a problem with this topic, and I've come around it in different ways, and I'm almost going to go to the point where I'm thinking of writing a popular book on it rather than an academic book, because there's just, Apple's a really icky topic to deal with. And I think it's icky because of this. Let me play you this little clip here. This is an advert that Samsung put together, which I think is a really nice little parody of some of the kind of things that go on around Apple.
Hey, they're saying this phone's going to be like a precious jewel.
Ooh, I love that.
The headphone jack is going to be on the bottom.
I heard the connector is all digital. What does that even mean?
Who knows? On site.
All I'm saying is that they should have a priority line for people who've waited 5 times.
I heard you have to have an adapter to use the dock on the new one.
Yeah, but they make the coolest adapters.
Obviously, there are these things with Apple fans. There are people who enthuse about all the products. And part of it, of course, is down to this guy. Steve Jobs, famous for his, reality distortion field. And there's a lot of, what would they call it, hilarity around Steve Jobs, the sense in which he becomes this larger-than-life character, and everything that Apple does gets put down to him. Of course, he wasn't the first person to follow this kind of mode of invention. Interesting, if you look at pictures of Thomas Edison, I found this, I was looking online, and you get almost exactly the same sort of setup for many of these pictures of him. You know, the inventor to the right and this kind of little wise quote on the left. Not really quite clear what these quotes mean. They seem to tell us something deep about our lives. But then if you spend any time examining the life of the characters who purportedly said this, they seem to often show very few of the characteristics that the quotes show. The quotes usually show kind of insight and somebody who had that, some sort of balance. And these people, Edison and Jobs, both shared a really unbalanced and damaging to those around them lives as well. And Edison and Jobs also were very similar in that while Edison is credited for inventing famously the light bulb, giving us our template for how we think about inventors, he had hundreds and hundreds of researchers who worked for him, just like Steve Jobs did. And Edison, while his name was on the patents, did not really invent any of the things that are credited to him. There's a reality distortion field around Apple, and I think the trouble is that there's this kind of fanhood around it, and also this distortion. But unfortunately, we have to take them seriously because they have changed the field, at least my field of mobile technology. Another problem with Apple is they're a bit of a parasite. They spend actually very little on R&D. Now the numbers are a little bit different now. So I think I found, so maybe a little bit, probably about double now actually. So they're up there maybe spending about as much on research as IBM. But obviously their research is kind of impact. You could do this calculation 100 different ways, but if you think of how big HCI is as a research field, CAI has about 3,000 attendees. If you say that actually 6,000 HCI researchers, and each of them ridiculously, one might say about $500,000 each, you get to about 3 billion. So Apple's R&D budget is bigger than the whole field of HCI, so we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves if they seem to be innovating in ways that we're not. That's certainly true. But they're still a company that doesn't give anything back, and it's only recently, I think, that they've actually started to attend conferences under the name Apple. Previously, they had a rule that they could attend conferences, but they couldn't get a signal from Apple. A little bit interesting. And it's not just the iPhone, really, is it? We're kind of honest, we can see that they have, certainly in terms of industrial design, they have had a large impact on the shape and the form that our technology takes. Of course, they're not allergic to it, of course, is stealing back. Part of what I'm going to talk about is how their innovations actually build very much incrementally on previous innovations. I think the new iOS for the phone is actually very similar to a Windows phone in lots of ways. Okay. So, this is a story of innovation, a story of great men like Steve Jobs. It's also a story about me losing a little bit of money. Because I bought Apple stock when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, which was back down here. And I sold it over here. I didn't really make any money, I lost a little bit, I think, when you took in all the expenses and such. For the first 5 years that Steve Jobs was heading Apple, they really didn't do anything. It wasn't just like this magic person came along and then the kingdom was torn again. For 5 years, their stock price went up and then down, and they really didn't do that much that got the newspaper headlines. The iPod is perhaps one of the first innovations that I think got more popular attention. But if you see for the first 3 years, it basically just doesn't sell. It's a massive flop. And in fact, actually, it's only when the company go against Steve Jobs and launch the iPod with software that works on Windows machines that it actually takes off and becomes the kind of running success that it eventually was. Is this success takes some time? Or maybe sometimes that things aren't a far thing. Could have been different, where I wanted to kind of put in your head. Okay, so of course after the iPod, Apple launched the iPhone, essentially out of nowhere. And there's also different ways of kind of breaking down what was innovative about that particular device. It wasn't particularly innovative in terms of hardware, but what it was just as good as the best phones you could get on the market right about that time. Which for a company to come from nowhere to actually launch a phone that was as good as the top-end Nokia at the time was pretty impressive. If you're the sort of person who gets kind of excited about specifications, it was essentially the same graphics hardware in the remember that one? N95, I think, as was in the iPhone. About the same speed of chip, about the same amount of memory as well, actually. So they actually innovated so much on hardware, they did actually do something that was at least as good as what was out there. I would argue that their biggest innovation was a really simple one. When I worked on the design of mobile applications before the iPhone, the biggest problem was always you just had too much stuff to show and the screen was too small. And there just wasn't a very good way of panning that small display around a larger amount of information. And now we do it every day. It's called momentum scrolling. It's a really pretty simple but subtle interface technique that allows us just to move our finger. There's a little bit of momentum on it, so it'll shoot off the edge if we go fast enough. This is some video of somebody going through their Instagram feed. I'm swearing in there, and I think that the reason why that was so powerful was it allowed the small display to pan around and show much more information. It solved the paging problem, which had bedeviled mobile interface design up till that point. And you can use it to obviously go up and down. The other example I think that's really kind of clear is when you're going around a map, that you can use it. And of course there's other innovations that come in when you think about maps, but I want to focus just a little bit on that scrolling. Now, one of the things that you need for the scrolling to work is there needs to be this illusion that the content is moving with your finger. If it jerks or it moves, you lose this illusion and it begins to feel like there's something wrong with the interface. And this goes back to this point I made about Apple's animation frameworks, which they had on their operating system at that time. It builds on a set of innovations that they introduced. One can take some of the innovations back to this PostScript, Quartz, GL, and then Core Animation ultimately, which was introduced with the iPhone. And these were aspects of the software which enabled them to do this smooth scrolling. Essentially, the animation engine did this thing where if there wasn't enough resources to display smoothly, it would drop frames. So in animation terms, you would actually drop frames, so the thing would always track exactly your finger when you're scrolling. And this actually comes from Jobs' insistence that when you go over the dock in OS X, sometimes if you set it so it magnifies the application that you're over. Maybe not such a good HCI technique, but anyway, he wanted that to be as smooth as possible and insisted that they write this animation engine which would drop frames. And also use the graphics accelerator, which was necessary at that time, and something that hadn't really been used so much in operating systems and connecting used for games at that time. So because of these innovations, Apple had a desktop operating system that could animate very smoothly. And that enabled them to do a mobile operating system that could animate smoothly, and that is how they could do momentum scrolling, and that is how they could solve the problem that bedeviled mobile interface design up to that point. So it turns out it was Apple that could do this because of this, in a sense, rather odd insistence that the frame rate would always be smooth, that the animations would always be smooth on the screen. And this was why so many other companies struggled afterwards to emulate the iPhone's user interface, because they were trying to essentially retrospectively update their display subsystem. Geeky technical bit over. Now, obviously it wasn't just having this display frameworks that enabled the iPhone to do what it did. If you look at a lot of the user interface innovations, many of them can go down to this guy, Bas Ording. He was inventor of 207 patents while he was at Apple, including the patent for list scrolling and momentum scrolling, which turned out to be one of the most important patents for the Samsung legal case, which still rumbles on, but it's essentially sell by Samsung paying a amount of money to Apple. Now, Bas Ording is an HCI researcher by training. He's Dutch, you probably guess from the name. There's quite a nice little Doors of Perception talk that he gave before he joined Apple. And Bas's interest, as far as I can tell, I've never spoke to him, but as far as I can tell from stuff that I was reading, he was very much interested in the physicality of user interfaces. He was also the inventor of the magnification on the OS X DOS. Just a creepy picture of him with Steve Jobs, which I found from his Facebook page. Okay, it's slightly creepy. And of course also he was the inventor of the patent for exposing as well. So Bas Ording, although he's essentially unknown, is the user interface developer that makes the iPhone possible. His fingers are over many of Apple's interface innovations that you can find these through the patent. So, the hardware is as good on the iPhone as what is available. You have these kind of really innovative designers, of which Bas Ording is perhaps one that can pick out. But what else was going on when they were making the iPhone? Well, I want to kind of quickly tell you 3 stories from the invention of the iPhone, which I think are kind of illuminating. When they went through the prototypes for the iPhone, one of the issues was, and this was something that would come back to bite Apple quite hard, was how do you make an aerial? Because they wanted an aluminium device, but aluminium has this property that it blocks radio waves, a cage of different sorts. And that means that it's very difficult to have a metal box and actually have a phone inside that metal box. So they went through a set of different innovations about having to mix plastic with aluminium to get the device to work. But fundamentally, they never really solved this problem, and on later phones, one of the challenges they had was that building a metal phone would mean that would reduce the ability of the aerials to get a good cellular signal. The key design feature, though, which they wanted to preserve, Jonathan Ive preserves the design, is, you can see it in this one here, in the black one there. And it's this infinity pool-like glass surface on the front with very little illumination between the end of the glass and the kind of rest of the phone. And this is important because this is our form factor now. This is the form factor that all sorts of technology take now, is this same gene, if you will, of design that finds its way through. And they managed to, I think one of the industrial design innovations was that they managed to keep this flat expanse with building a metal phone and with actually allowing it to actually get a signal, a radio signal out from the phone. But interestingly, when they started on the project later to produce the iPhone, they weren't building an iPhone at all. They weren't building a phone at all. This is a little quote from Jobs' biography, Steve Jobs' biography. This guy badgered me. He's talking about, he goes for dinner with a friend of his wife's. This guy's badgering me about how Microsoft was going to completely change the world with this tablet PC. Apple ought to license Microsoft software, but if you do the device all wrong, it had a stylus. As soon as you have a stylus, you're dead. The dinner was like the 10th time we talked about it, and I was so sick of this. I came home and said, fuck this, let's show them what a tablet can really be. Classic Jobs kind of self-promotion there. But of course, because he's CEO of Apple, he can actually do it. It begins with a tablet. I had this idea about having a glass display, a multi-touch display, you could type in with your fingers. I asked our people about it, and 6 months later, they came back with this amazing display. I gave it to one of our really brilliant UI guys, Bas. He got scrolling working and some other things, and I thought, my God, we can build a phone with this. So we put the tablet aside, and we went to work on the iPhone. And indeed, you look at the early prototypes that they were using for what became the iPhone, and later the iPad, they are essentially the lid of an Apple laptop. with a touch interface put into it. So the iPhone starts as a tablet, goes to being an iPhone, and then actually comes back again to being a tablet. My favourite story though about the iPhone is actually about Nokia. Anybody here work at Nokia or used to work at Nokia? I'll be careful what I say, maybe you can correct the story because this is from external sources. It was said at the time that Nokia showed no interest in the iPhone. That somehow they decided it was a ridiculous toy-like device and Nokia had nothing to worry about it. I think that was complete rubbish. Nokia was a company that had many faults, and if you followed the fights between the different lines of operating systems on the different phones, you can see that as a company had quite a lot of faults, but it was full of very, very clever people, and of course they identified the value of the iPhone. This is quite a nice article, of course, from a good old local newspaper here about a journalist getting involved with Nokia. What happened is the journalist sent a letter to Nokia saying, why are your phones basically so crap? But compared to the iPhone, the phones were really at that point really much harder to use. And after going through multiple meetings, he finally gets to meet a Nokia executive who he has this exchange with. I agree completely with everything you wrote in your letter and with what you have said now. I was astounded. I agree completely with you, and I want to apologise on behalf of Nokia for producing a bad telephone for you. He told me that when the iPhone came out to the United States in the summer of 2007, the situation was followed at Nokia with keen interest. A large number of iPhones were immediately delivered to Nokia's head offices in Aalto by courier. The manager took one iPhone home that evening. He studied it so enthusiastically that it caught the interest of his 4-year-old daughter. As an experiment, he gave the telephone to his daughter, and she learned to use it immediately. In the evening, the parents were going to bed. The drowsy 4-year-old appeared at their bedroom door with a question. Can I take that magic telephone and put it under my pillow tonight? It was at that point that the Nokia executive understood that his company was in trouble. Obviously, when you saw the iPhone and if you were in the business, it wasn't surprising. To deny somehow that this wasn't an innovation was essentially a PR effort. And it's sad what happened afterwards, of course. There's Nokia fought to catch up. But this is one of those cases where technological innovation in a bunch of different ways does change the industry. So what did the iPhone do? It was in some ways incremental. As I said, it relied upon a host of other innovations, particularly ones that Apple could leverage in its operating system. It was opportunistic, it drawn on a lot of work, I think, in its research. Of course, they don't cite things when they do designs. It did have very innovative, I think, Bas was a particularly talented designer. And it all ended up in this kind of fight between the major industry dominant company and Apple. So it's interesting, I think, a really interesting kind of business history. But it's also one, I think, that had a big impact on HCI, because it changed at least my field of mobile interface design. It changed how I thought of mobile devices. This is a photograph from the Occupy protests in Hong Kong a few months ago. And I guess you know what the lights are that shine in the crowd. People's screens from the phones. If you look at any public area now, you'll see people on their mobile phones. I had the pleasure, I have a school friend who's a minor celebrity now in the UK, and he was telling me that one of the problems he has now is that whenever he walks anywhere, he says people take these phones out and start taking pictures of them. And he says they sort of almost like start marching towards them like zombies with these phones in their hand trying to take pictures of them, which is kind of distressing. We are always augmented now with our mobile devices, and in part I think that is because of these interface innovations. Since the iPhone came out, I've kind of tried to change my research, and I've tried to focus as much as possible on understanding how these devices work and some of the impacts they're having on people's lives. Basically, my method I always use, I'm a video ethnographer, so I get people to wear cameras and I install different recording software and I record what they're doing on their devices. So what's going on with these devices? What happens when we've got them in our hands? Well, I'm going to play you a little clip here. This is somebody who's wearing all these cameras that I've got them to wear. They're walking across the town and they're just looking on the map on their phone. You can see there's basically the phone and there's a picture from a friend who's with them, who's got the camera around their neck as well. And we're also going to do a little video which you'll see of what's going on the screen.
Let's see. I think actually, where are we? Here. Because I want to go through the forest. Gives me another way, but I think I will take this.
Okay. Let's do that little clip again. So we have different camera angles here, we've got people wearing the cameras. And we're just doing something that you've probably done on your phone. I did it this morning trying to get here. You pull out your phone, you look on the map, you zoom in and out, you look to see where you are, you look to see where your route is, and you're trying to work out where you're going to go. Here's the clip in a little bit more detail. I tend to sort of have this way of writing text, and splits it up a little bit. She does a really simple thing, right? She's with her friend, and she uses her fingers, and she zooms in on the map, and she says, here. She pinches in to where the blue dot is. And then the friend says, aha. And then she moves over into the forest there.
Let's see. I think actually where are we? Here. Because I want to go through the forest. Gives me another way, but I think I will take this.
The smooth scrolling of the content, this, again, this Baz's way of moving around with the finger on the content with the slight momentum. But what goes on here is she's talking around her phone. She's talking to the person who's next to her, and she's using the interface, but she's doing two things. She's also gesturing to the phone, but gesturing to her friend as well. So it's not just a thing where she's interacting with the phone, she's interacting with the person who's there. And this is one of the first clips that I looked at when I was recording people using their phone. And I had this realization. We talk around our phones. If you look at actually the sort of materials we collect, people talk about their phones all the time. All the time we've got the phone out and we're talking around them. It turns out about a third of the time that from our recordings, people have got their phone out, they're having a conversation with someone at the same time. These are not single-user devices exclusively. They're also things that we gesture around, we talk around. We're always doing lots of work on the interface, talking to other people at the same time. So the impact these little devices has isn't just that it lets us find our way or lets us get information. It's changing how we're talking to people. It's changing how we're talking to people who are around us. And I want to pull up maybe one of the most common examples, which is searching. Have you ever been in a conversation, this is maybe a kind of ordinary thing, you've been in a conversation, and someone's pulled out a phone and searched on something that's come up in the conversation? Maybe you've been at a pub quiz. Do you have pub quizzes in Finland? You know, it's some sort of quiz and someone pulls it out and then searches the answer on their phone, which they're not meant to do. People search on their phones. Often the reason why they search on their phones is because they want to answer something that comes up in conversation. Let me play a little clip. This is somebody who, they're having a conversation in a museum, and again you've got these little video feeds, and someone mentions a little YouTube video, and then he starts a search for it.
Have you seen that picture of the guy in the city who's cleaning out the elephant? And he's sweeping the elephant versus and symbols of the elephant's eyes.
No, I love it.
It's so beautiful.
We have to find it. Right.
So a pretty typical thing here. We're talking about this video of they've seen something in the gallery, and this reminds the woman there about this video about an elephant, and then they said, oh, I'm going to do a search online for it. So we have a paper coming out at CCW, which is called Searchable Objects. And it's about how in conversation we find things that we can search. And to be able to search on your phone, you need to have something you can find. You need a searchable object. And that's what happens here. In this case, they're going along and in this video is mentioned, he says, oh, I'll try and find that video. Continue the clip. So now he wants to find this particular clip, and then he pulls the phone out, and they have a little chat around the phone.
Is this pre or post getting rid of YouTube? YouTube, hey, that's what we want, good. Right, search. What do we search for? Elephant Arts Man.
Yeah, anything else.
Elephant Man. Head. Arms. Hey, there's the one.
Yeah, that was it.
I'm going to stop it before you see the video. Okay, in no time. It's kind of annoying, isn't it, when someone pulls out the phone and starts searching. What goes on in this clip, as you can see, is that the person who's doing the search starts to narrate their search. And then they ask the friend for what to search for, and she suggests some search terms, and they come up with the search terms together. And we talked about this in this paper we talked about is managing participation, that when you're doing something on your phone, you also want to manage how other people are involved so you don't seem needlessly rude. And this comes out in many of our clips that we look at. We say the people are searching, but they're actually doing stuff to make sure they include the people who are around in the search. So you don't just kind of go off and out into it, or at least not in all cases, they go off and do the search on your own. They want to manage the participation of those who are around. And this is quite a standard thing. People look at conversation, looking at how the participation of those who are in the conversation is managed. Okay, it's not a technical example, but just think what's going on here. The interface of search is influencing how people talk about their phones. Something that's getting decided on in California is changing parts of our conversation all around the world. There's hundreds of searches that go on, I imagine, in this building every day that involve somebody talking around the phone as they do the search. Okay, what else do we use our phones for? Well, of course, we use a lot of social media on phones. So why do we use social media on phones? Well, I'm going to a second clip. This is from a later study, so we don't have them wearing the cameras anymore. And this is a clip of a couple of people sitting, there's a couple that are sitting in a room, and they start talking about something that comes up on Facebook.
Hey, Donna, it says to move to Bakersfield. We're too far away. To which I would have to say something to the effect of, well, you haven't seen me in 38 years.
Two people sitting in a room, one of them browsing Facebook, starts to have a little bit of conversation with the person in the room based on what's happening on Facebook. I imagine this is a not so unfamiliar situation to you. Maybe the reason why we use Facebook isn't just because we like to get online about people, but it gives us something to talk about to the people who are around us. topic is a long-standing topic of interest for people like myself who study conversation. And what's interesting about these topics is the way that Facebook provides conversation topics. We call them local resources. The point I'm getting to is that local resources are what people make conversations out of. What they can make conversations out of and endlessly. The only way you can maybe think of it, how in the world can they take whatever's at hand and make conversation after conversation after conversation out of it? Probably Sachs lecture in the 1970s. Talking about where topic and conversation comes from. Conversation and topic comes, I think, from social media. A lot of the time. Okay. So, I've been those two examples are fairly positive. We can search, we can look at things online, we can use social media to start conversations. But are there negative impacts that mobile phones are having on our lives? Well, I think you might be familiar with these kind of things like this. And there's been something of a little mini moral panic around mobile devices in the last few years. The sociologist Goffman talks a lot about interactions between and a community. You don't need to live in Finland for too long to realise that interactions between the and community are heavily regulated. We do talk to those people around us, but we do them in very regulated ways. Shop interactions, maybe one that we're familiar with. We have never sparked up conversations that frequently with strangers or city life would itself be impossible. But that said, that hasn't stopped many writers who should know better talking about how mobile phones have somehow perhaps damaged our face-to-face conversations with others. Do they distract us? Are we ignoring our children because we're glued to the phone all the time? So I went and looked at my data, trying to find an example of somebody ignoring or harming their interaction with others from using the mobile phone. Here's a clip here which I think maybe shows some of that. This is two people in a pub. They're having a conversation about some work that was done, and then the person who's on the phone tries to get an email address from the person they just met. They're in the Whirlpool pub, and you're going to see them asking for email addresses.
And the last day from him was there was a crowd engineers going there and looks at flashbacks. What's the email address? Last night yesterday was the agency rang out and said, this is what I see the update. They've come back and said none of the people who were forward, they've said that none of the people who were forward would be suitable, but also it turns out that SCC were in charge of it. But apparently the SEC had been sacked from the job as well. I'm not surprised, it's shit. I know. What's your email address? I was working for SEC at Netherlands, and that's why I had to leave. Because they're a bunch of fucking idiots. They're worse than the computer set. That's saying something. What's your email address?
Finally, gets the email address from the person who's talked to him. So it's clear, of course, that the devices still have some compulsion. In this case, he wants to enter an email address for the guy. Does actually address the story in the right ways, though. I'm not sure the whole storytelling here breaks down because he's got a mobile phone in his hands. But it's not to say that these devices don't ever cause distractions and possibly some issue with the conversation. I would suggest that actually what my data shows is that we're really kind of focusing on the social arrangement of conversation around the phone. Loneliness and alienation are serious problems, but if you think your iPhone is making you lonely, your problem isn't your iPhone. There's other problems that are going on that really maybe we should be worried about. One of the most recent studies we just kind of finished with another way in which I think these iPhone devices is beginning to change our lives is changing how we work. And so we just finished a study about Uber and how Uber is used, kind of another thing that's been enabled by the introduction of the iPhone. I'll just mention it, maybe we can bring it up in the questions. Okay, so let me conclude here. I wanted to focus on this talk, give you a little bit of history of the Apple, but In my research recently, I've been really focusing on this question of how the devices work in interaction. And it seems to me there's really odd things going on, that what's happening in California is really influencing how we talk all around the world. We talk around phones. Telephones create a new form of talk, telephone talk. It seems to me these machines are in turn creating new forms of talk. If they're changing how we talk, I think that's a pretty big impact that these devices have had on our lives. And I'll end there, so thank you.